The history of the Frisians is long and complex, stretching back thousands of years before they became known as the Frisia during the Roman era. To truly understand their story, we need to go back as far as possible, into the prehistoric times when the ancestors of the Frisians first began to inhabit the low-lying coastal regions along the North Sea. The landscape that would become Friesland was shaped by the ice ages. As the glaciers retreated, they left behind a vast, flat terrain of wetlands, peat bogs, and sandy soils. The area was crisscrossed by rivers and dotted with lakes, making it a challenging environment for early human settlers. However, it was also rich in resources, with abundant fish, game, and fertile land that could be cultivated once the water was managed. The first signs of human habitation in the region date back to the Mesolithic period, around 800 to 5000 BCE. These early people were likely hunter-gatherers who moved with the seasons, exploiting the rich natural resources of the coastal areas. Archaeological evidence from this time includes stone tools, remnants of temporary campsites, and middens, ancient trash heaps, that give us a glimpse into their diet and lifestyle. As time progressed, the people of the region began to settle more permanently, particularly during the Neolithic period, around 400 to 2000 BCE. This era saw the introduction of farming, as well as the domestication of animals. The communities that emerged were small, with people living in simple wooden houses built on the higher, drier land. They cultivated crops like barley and wheat, and they raised cattle, sheep, and pigs. One of the most significant developments during this time was the construction of the first terps, artificial dwelling mounds. These mounds were built to protect the homes from flooding, which was a constant threat in the low-lying lands. The terps were made by piling up earth and clay, sometimes reinforced with wood or stone. Over time, these mounds would grow higher as more material was added, and they became central to Frisian life, offering a safe haven during the frequent storms and floods. The Bronze Age, around 2000 to 800 BCE, brought further changes to the region. The people who lived in what would become Friesland began to trade more extensively with their neighbors, exchanging goods like amber, which was abundant in the Baltic region, for bronze tools and weapons. This period also saw the construction of more permanent settlements, as well as the emergence of social hierarchies, as some families or clans grew wealthier and more powerful than others. By the Iron Age, around 800 BCE to 50 CE, the people living along the North Sea coast had developed a distinct culture, characterized by its own styles of pottery, tools, and burial practices. They were now farming the land more intensively, using iron plows and other tools to cultivate larger fields. They also began to build more substantial wooden houses, often grouped together in small villages on the terps. It was during the late Iron Age that the people living in this region began to be identified as the Frisia by the Romans. The name Frisia likely comes from the Old Germanic word frisen, meaning curly-haired, though the exact origin of the name is still debated by scholars. The Frisia were part of a larger group of Germanic tribes that lived in the areas that are now the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. The Frisia were known to the Romans as a seafaring people, skilled in navigation and fishing. They lived in the coastal areas from what is now the northern Netherlands to parts of northwestern Germany. The Romans first encountered the Frisia during their campaigns in Germania, beginning in the 1st century BCE. The Frisia were not a single, unified tribe, but rather a loose confederation of clans and families who shared a common culture and language. The relationship between the Frisia and the Romans was complex. Initially, the Frisia managed to avoid direct conflict with the Roman Empire by maintaining their independence and offering tribute when necessary. They were shrewd negotiators, aware that their strategic location along the North Sea coast made them valuable allies or dangerous enemies to the Romans. During the early 1st century CE, the Frisia came under increasing pressure from the expanding Roman Empire. The Romans, led by generals like Drusus and Tiberius, pushed further into Germania, seeking to secure the northern borders of the empire and bring the Germanic tribes under Roman control. The Frisia, along with other tribes in the region, resisted this encroachment, leading to a series of skirmishes and battles. One of the most significant events in this period was the Battle of Badohena Wood in 28 CE, where the Frisia, led by their chieftain, defeated a Roman army in a dense forest near their homeland. The victory was a testament to the Frisians' knowledge of the local terrain and their skill in guerrilla warfare. However, the conflict also marked the beginning of a long and uneasy relationship with the Romans, as the Frisia continued to resist Roman authority while trying to avoid outright war. Despite these tensions, the Frisia did engage in trade with the Romans, exchanging goods like cattle, hides, and fish for Roman coins, weapons, and luxury items. This trade led to some cultural exchange, as Roman goods and ideas began to filter into Frisian society. The Frisia adopted some aspects of Roman culture, including the use of Roman coins and some Roman building techniques, but they largely retained their own customs and way of life. As the Roman Empire entered its decline in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the pressure on the Frisia and other Germanic tribes began to ease. The Roman legions withdrew from many of their northern territories, leaving the Frisia and their neighbors to govern themselves once more. This period of relative freedom allowed the Frisia to strengthen their own identity and culture, setting the stage for the next chapter in their history. The early history of the Frisians is thus a story of resilience and adaptation. From their prehistoric roots in the wetlands and peat bogs of the North Sea coast to their encounters with the might of the Roman Empire, the Frisia managed to maintain their independence and cultural identity in the face of significant challenges. As we move forward in their history, we'll see how this resilience would continue to define the Frisians as they navigated the turbulent centuries that followed. After centuries of navigating their relationship with the Roman Empire, the Frisia found themselves facing a new reality as Roman power waned and eventually receded from their region. The withdrawal of Roman forces from the northern provinces in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries CE left a power vacuum in the area, setting the stage for the emergence of new tribal identities and shifting alliances. For the Frisia, this period marked the beginning of a more distinct and cohesive Frisian identity, shaped by their interactions with neighboring tribes and their efforts to maintain independence in a rapidly changing world. With the Romans gone, the Frisia were no longer subject to the same pressures that had defined their relationship with the empire. They were now free to govern themselves and manage their own affairs without the constant threat of Roman intervention. However, this newfound freedom also brought new challenges, as the Frisia had to navigate the complex political landscape of the post-Roman world. During this period, the Frisia began to consolidate their power and expand their territory. The low-lying coastal regions of what is now the northern Netherlands and northwestern Germany became the heartland of the Frisian people. This area, characterized by its rich wetlands, estuaries, and sandy soils, provided the Frisia with the resources they needed to sustain their communities and build their society. The Frisia were not the only Germanic tribe to rise to prominence during this time. The neighboring Saxons, Angles, and Jutes were also expanding their territories and seeking to assert their influence in the region. The interactions between these tribes were complex, involving both conflict and cooperation. The Frisia, with their strong maritime tradition, were particularly active in trade and raiding along the coasts of the North Sea, establishing themselves as formidable seafarers. One of the key factors in the rise of Frisian identity was their ability to maintain control over their territory and resist domination by larger, more powerful tribes. Unlike some of their neighbors, the Frisia were never fully absorbed into the Frankish or Saxon kingdoms that emerged in the post-Roman period. Instead, they managed to retain a degree of autonomy, largely due to their geographic position and their skills as navigators and traders. The Frisia were known for their expertise in managing the challenging environment of their homeland. The construction of terps, artificial dwelling mounds, continued to be a central feature of Frisian life, allowing them to live and farm in areas that were otherwise prone to flooding. These mounds, some of which reached heights of several meters, were often reinforced with wooden structures and surrounded by dikes to protect against the encroaching sea. The terps not only provided safety but also became centers of community life, where families and clans could gather, trade, and conduct their daily activities. As the Frisia expanded their territory, they began to encounter new threats from both land and sea. The Saxons, who were also expanding their influence in the region, posed a significant challenge to Frisian independence. The Saxons were a powerful and aggressive tribe, known for their military prowess and their desire to control the coastal regions of the North Sea. The Frisia found themselves in a precarious position, needing to defend their lands from Saxon incursions, while also seeking to maintain their independence. One of the most significant conflicts during this period was the series of wars between the Frisia and the Saxons in the late 5th and early 6th centuries CE. These wars were marked by brutal fighting and shifting alliances, as both sides sought to gain control over the fertile and strategically important coastal regions. The Frisia, though often outnumbered, used their knowledge of the local terrain and their skills as seafarers to resist Saxon advances. While they were able to hold their own in many battles, the constant pressure from the Saxons forced the Frisia to adopt new strategies for survival. In addition to their conflicts with the Saxons, the Frisia also had to contend with the expanding power of the Franks, who were emerging as the dominant force in the region. The Franks, under their Merovingian and later Carolingian rulers, sought to extend their control over the lands once held by the Romans, including the territories inhabited by the Frisia. The Franks were formidable opponents, with a well-organized military and a strong central authority, making them a significant threat to Frisian independence. Despite these challenges, the Frisia managed to maintain their autonomy through a combination of military resistance and strategic alliances. They were able to leverage their position as skilled traders and seafarers to negotiate favorable terms with their more powerful neighbors, often agreeing to pay tribute in exchange for peace. This pragmatic approach allowed the Frisia to avoid direct confrontation with the Franks while continuing to assert their independence. As the Frisia navigated this complex political landscape, their cultural identity began to take shape more clearly. The Frisian language, which was part of the larger West Germanic language group, began to develop distinct characteristics that set it apart from the languages spoken by their neighbors. This early form of Old Frisian would later evolve into Middle Frisian and Modern Frisian, but even at this early stage, it played a crucial role in unifying the Frisian people and distinguishing them from other Germanic tribes. The Frisia were also known for their adherence to a set of customs and laws that governed their society. These laws, which were passed down orally from generation to generation, emphasized the importance of kinship, honor, and the protection of one's community. The Frisia were a deeply communal people, with strong ties to their families and clans, and these social bonds were reinforced by their shared language and customs. One of the most important aspects of Frisian society was the assembly, known as the Thing or Ding. The Thing was a gathering of free men who came together to discuss and decide on matters of common interest, including disputes, legal matters, and the defense of the community. The Thing was a cornerstone of Frisian democracy, reflecting the egalitarian values that were deeply ingrained in Frisian culture. Every free Frisian man had the right to participate in the Thing, and decisions were made collectively, often after lengthy debates and discussions. The Frisia also maintained a strong connection to their religious beliefs, which were rooted in the Germanic pagan traditions that predated the arrival of Christianity in the region. The Frisia worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, many of whom were associated with natural forces like the sea, the wind, and the earth. These deities were honored through rituals, sacrifices, and festivals, which were closely tied to the agricultural cycle and the changing seasons. The Frisia's religious practices were also deeply connected to their sense of place and their relationship with the land. The wetlands, rivers, and forests of their homeland were seen as sacred spaces, inhabited by spirits and ancestral beings. The construction of terps, dikes, and other structures was often accompanied by rituals meant to appease these spirits and ensure the safety and prosperity of the community. By the early 7th century CE, the Frisia had established themselves as a distinct and powerful people in the North Sea region. They had successfully navigated the challenges of post-Roman Europe, maintaining their independence while forging a unique cultural identity. Their language, customs, and way of life set them apart from their neighbors, and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances ensured their survival in a turbulent and often hostile world. The story of the Frisia in this period is one of resilience and determination. Despite the pressures from powerful neighbors like the Saxons and the Franks, the Frisia managed to carve out a space for themselves in the shifting landscape of early medieval Europe. Their strong sense of identity, rooted in their language, customs, and connection to the land, would continue to shape their history in the centuries to come. As the early medieval period progressed, the Frisia, now more commonly referred to simply as Frisians, continued to develop a distinct cultural and linguistic identity that set them apart from their neighboring tribes. This period saw the emergence of Old Frisian, a language that would play a crucial role in unifying the Frisian people and preserving their cultural heritage. Alongside these linguistic developments, the Frisians began to establish a more centralized form of governance, leading to the rise of what some historians refer to as the Frisian kingdom. This chapter explores these developments in detail, focusing on how they shaped the course of Frisian history. By the early 7th century, the Frisian territories stretched along the North Sea coast, encompassing what is now the northern Netherlands, northwestern Germany, and parts of Denmark. This region, often referred to as Frisia Magna, Greater Frisia, was home to a population of free men and women who lived in small, independent communities. Despite the lack of a strong central authority, the Frisians shared a common language, Old Frisian, which was part of the West Germanic language family. Old Frisian was closely related to Old English and Old Saxon, reflecting the close ties between the Frisians and their Anglo-Saxon and Saxon neighbors. Old Frisian began to take shape as a written language in the early medieval period, with the earliest surviving texts dating from the 12th and 13th centuries. However, the language itself was spoken long before it was written down, and it played a key role in the daily lives of the Frisian people. Old Frisian was used for a variety of purposes, including legal documents, religious texts, and poetry. The language was rich and expressive, with a vocabulary that reflected the Frisians' close connection to the sea, the land, and their agricultural way of life. One of the most important contributions of Old Frisian was the development of the Frisian legal code, known as the Lex Frisianum or Frisian law. This body of law was based on customary practices that had been passed down orally for generations. The Lex Frisianum was eventually written down in the 8th century, during the reign of Charlemagne, and it provides a valuable insight into the legal and social structures of early Frisian society. The code emphasized the importance of kinship, honor, and the protection of individual rights, and it was enforced through the Thing, assembly, where disputes were settled and laws were upheld. The emergence of Old Frisian as a distinct language was closely tied to the rise of the Frisian kingdom, a loose confederation of Frisian territories that began to take shape in the 7th century. The Frisian kingdom was not a centralized state in the modern sense, but rather a collection of semi-independent regions that were united by a common language, culture, and legal system. The Frisian rulers, known as kings or dukes, wielded authority over their respective territories, but their power was often limited by the autonomy of local leaders and the strong tradition of communal decision-making through the Thing. One of the most prominent figures in the early history of the Frisian kingdom was King Algisel, who ruled in the late 7th century. Algisel is remembered as a powerful and astute leader who successfully navigated the complex political landscape of the time. He maintained the independence of Friesland while forging alliances with neighboring powers, including the Merovingian Franks, who were the dominant force in Western Europe at the time. Algisel's reign was marked by his efforts to resist the expansionist ambitions of the Frankish kings, particularly Dagobert I and his successors. The Frisians, under Algisel's leadership, were able to maintain their autonomy and even expand their influence along the North Sea coast. Algisel is also credited with fostering the development of trade and commerce in Friesland, particularly in the burgeoning port cities of Dorstad and Utrecht, which became important centers of trade between the Frisians and other European peoples. The rise of the Frisian kingdom was also accompanied by the arrival of Christian missionaries, who sought to convert the pagan Frisians to Christianity. The Christianization of Friesland was a gradual and often contentious process, marked by both peaceful conversions and violent conflicts. The Frisians, like many other Germanic tribes, were deeply attached to their traditional pagan beliefs, which were centered around the worship of gods and goddesses associated with nature, war, and fertility. The first significant attempt to convert the Frisians to Christianity came in the early 8th century, with the arrival of the Anglo-Saxon missionary Willibrord. Willibrord, who later became known as the Apostle to the Frisians, was sent by the Pope to spread the Christian faith in the Frisian territories. He established his base in Utrecht, where he built a church and began preaching to the local population. However, his efforts were met with resistance from many Frisians, who saw the new religion as a threat to their traditional way of life. The conflict between Christianity and paganism in Friesland came to a head during the reign of King Redbad, who ruled from around 680 to 719 CE. Redbad was a staunch defender of the old gods and a fierce opponent of Christianization. He is remembered in Frisian history as a symbol of resistance against foreign influence and the imposition of Christianity. According to legend, Redbad was on the verge of being baptized by Willibrord when he asked if he would see his ancestors in the Christian afterlife. When told that his pagan ancestors were in hell, Redbad refused baptism, declaring that he would rather be in hell with his ancestors than in heaven with the Christians. Redbad's resistance to Christianity led to several conflicts with the Franks, who were determined to bring Friesland under their control and convert its people to the Christian faith. One of the most significant of these conflicts was the Battle of the Bourne in 734 CE, where the Frisians, led by Papo, one of Redbad's successors, were defeated by the Frankish forces under Charles Martel. This defeat marked the beginning of the end for the Frisian kingdom, as the Franks gradually extended their control over the Frisian territories. Despite the defeat, the Frisians continued to resist Frankish domination and the spread of Christianity. The process of Christianization was slow and uneven, with many Frisians clinging to their traditional beliefs well into the 9th and 10th centuries. However, over time, the influence of the church grew, and Christianity gradually took hold in Friesland. The Christianization of Friesland was often accompanied by the destruction of pagan temples and the construction of churches, which became new centers of community life. The rise of Christianity in Friesland also had a significant impact on the development of Old Frisian literature and culture. The Christian missionaries introduced new forms of writing and scholarship, which were heavily influenced by the Latin language and the teachings of the Church. This period saw the production of religious texts in Old Frisian, including translations of the Bible and the lives of saints. These texts played a crucial role in the spread of Christian teachings and the integration of Friesland into the broader Christian world. The decline of the Frisian kingdom and the spread of Christianity marked the end of an era in Frisian history. However, the Frisians' strong sense of identity, rooted in their language, laws, and customs, endured. Even as they were absorbed into the Carolingian Empire, the Frisians retained a degree of autonomy and continued to govern themselves according to their own traditions. In conclusion, the development of Old Frisian and the rise of the Frisian kingdom were key moments in the early history of the Frisians. These developments laid the foundation for the Frisian identity that would endure through centuries of change and upheaval. The conflicts with the Franks and the gradual Christianization of Friesland were significant turning points, shaping the future of the Frisian people and their place in the wider world. The Viking Age, which spanned roughly from the late 8th century to the early 11th century, was a time of great upheaval and transformation in Europe. The Norsemen, seafarers from Scandinavia, embarked on raids, explorations, and trade expeditions across vast stretches of the continent, leaving a lasting impact on the regions they encountered. For the Frisians, who inhabited the coastal regions of the North Sea, this period was both a time of opportunity and peril. Their strategic location made them key players in the North Sea trade networks, but it also exposed them to the raids and conquests of the Vikings. This chapter explores the complex relationship between the Frisians and the Norsemen during the Viking Age, highlighting the Frisians' role as both traders and warriors. By the late 8th century, the Frisian kingdom had largely been absorbed into the Carolingian Empire, following the defeat of King Redbad and the gradual Christianization of Friesland. However, the Frisians retained a strong sense of identity and continued to govern themselves according to their own laws and customs. The terps, dikes, and canals that characterized Frisian settlements were still central to their way of life, providing protection from the sea and facilitating trade. The Frisians' experience with the sea had made them skilled navigators and shipbuilders, and they were well-positioned to take advantage of the growing trade networks that connected northern Europe with the British Isles, Scandinavia, and the Frankish Empire. Frisian merchants were active participants in this trade, exchanging goods such as wool, furs, fish, and salt for luxury items like silver, silk, and spices. The port cities of Dorstad, Utrecht, and Emden became important centers of commerce, attracting traders from across Europe and beyond. However, the same waterways that facilitated trade also made Friesland vulnerable to the raids of the Norsemen. The Vikings, driven by a combination of economic necessity, political ambition, and the desire for adventure, began their infamous raids on the British Isles and the Frankish coast in the late 8th century. The first recorded Viking raid on a Frisian settlement occurred in 810 CE, when a fleet of Norse ships attacked the trading center of Dorstad. Dorstad, located on the banks of the Rhine River near its confluence with the Lech and Vaal rivers, was one of the most important trading hubs in northern Europe at the time. The raid on Dorstad was a significant blow to the Frisian economy, as the Vikings plundered the town's wealth and disrupted the flow of trade. Despite the devastation, Dorstad recovered and continued to be a key trading center for several decades, though it would suffer further Viking attacks in the years to come. The Frisians, like many of their neighbors, found themselves in a precarious position during the Viking Age. They were both victims of the Viking raids and active participants in the North Sea trade that connected the Viking world with the rest of Europe. The Frisians' expertise in navigation and their extensive knowledge of the coastal and riverine routes made them valuable allies, or targets, for the Vikings, depending on the circumstances. In some cases, the Frisians chose to collaborate with the Vikings, forming alliances that allowed them to protect their interests and share in the spoils of raids. These alliances were often pragmatic, based on mutual benefit rather than shared cultural or religious values. The Frisians, like the Vikings, were skilled warriors, and they occasionally joined the Norsemen in their raids on the British Isles and the Frankish territories. These joint expeditions were motivated by the prospect of wealth and the desire to maintain control over key trade routes. One of the most famous Frisian leaders during the Viking Age was Rorik of Dorstad, a Frisian chieftain who played a significant role in the politics of the region. Rorik was a member of the Carolingian nobility and a nephew of Harald Klak, a Danish king who had been a vassal of the Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious. Rorik's position as a nobleman with connections to both the Frisians and the Danes allowed him to navigate the complex political landscape of the time. Rorik's story is a fascinating example of the fluidity of power and identity during the Viking Age. In the 840s, Rorik was granted the governorship of Dorstad by the Frankish Emperor Lothair I, in recognition of his loyalty and military service. However, Rorik's loyalties were not always clear-cut. In 850, he switched sides and aligned himself with the Danish king Horik I, who was leading Viking raids against the Frankish territories. Rorik's decision to join the Danes may have been motivated by the desire to protect Frisian interests from the increasingly aggressive Viking attacks. As a result of his alliance with the Danes, Rorik was able to secure control over large parts of Friesland, including Dorstad and Utrecht. His rule was marked by a delicate balancing act between maintaining his loyalty to the Carolingians and managing his relationship with the Viking leaders. Rorik's ability to navigate these complex relationships allowed him to maintain power for several decades, even as the political situation in Northern Europe grew increasingly unstable. The Viking Age was a time of both opportunity and danger for the Frisians. Their involvement in the North Sea trade brought wealth and influence, but it also exposed them to the violence and chaos of the Viking raids. The Frisians' response to this situation was shaped by their pragmatic approach to politics and their willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. Whether through alliances with the Vikings or efforts to defend their territories, the Frisians sought to protect their way of life and ensure their survival in a turbulent world. Despite the challenges of the Viking Age, the Frisians continued to thrive as a distinct people with their own language, customs, and traditions. Old Frisian remained the language of the people, used in everyday life, legal proceedings, and religious practices. The Thing assemblies continued to be a central part of Frisian society, providing a forum for communal decision-making and the resolution of disputes. The Viking Age also left a lasting impact on Frisian culture, particularly in the realm of mythology and folklore. The Norse gods and heroes, with their tales of bravery, treachery, and the supernatural, found their way into Frisian oral traditions. The blending of Frisian and Norse cultural elements created a rich tapestry of stories and beliefs that would continue to influence Frisian identity for centuries to come. In conclusion, the Viking Age was a pivotal period in Frisian history, marked by both conflict and cooperation with the Norsemen. The Frisians' strategic location and maritime expertise made them key players in the North Sea trade, but it also exposed them to the dangers of Viking raids. Through a combination of military strength, political alliances, and cultural resilience, the Frisians navigated the challenges of this era while maintaining their distinct identity. The period known as the Frisian Freedom is one of the most significant chapters in Frisian history, representing a time when the Frisians fiercely defended their independence and autonomy against external powers. This era, roughly spanning from the late 11th century to the 15th century, was marked by a unique political structure that distinguished Friesland from its neighbors and a series of conflicts that tested the resilience of the Frisian people. The concept of the Frisian freedom, Friesvrijheid, is rooted in the legendary declaration made by Emperor Charlemagne, who, according to Frisian tradition, granted the Frisians a special status of independence in recognition of their loyalty and military service. While the historical accuracy of this legend is debated, it reflects the deep-seated belief among the Frisians that they were a free people, bound only by their own laws and customs. The Frisian freedom was characterized by the absence of feudal overlords and a strong central authority, which was typical of most European regions during the Middle Ages. Instead, the Frisians governed themselves through local assemblies, things or dings, where free men gathered to make decisions, settle disputes, and uphold the law. These assemblies were a continuation of the ancient Germanic tradition and were a central feature of Frisian society. The idea of Frisian freedom was not just a political concept but also a deeply ingrained part of Frisian identity. The Frisians prided themselves on their independence, and their refusal to submit to external rulers became a defining characteristic of their culture. This independence, however, was constantly challenged by neighboring powers, particularly the Counts of Holland and the Bishops of Utrecht, who sought to bring Friesland under their control. The conflict between Friesland and the County of Holland was one of the most enduring struggles during this period. The Counts of Holland, seeking to expand their territory and influence, repeatedly attempted to assert their authority over the Frisian lands. The Frisians, however, were determined to resist these incursions, leading to a series of wars and skirmishes known as the Frisian-Hollander Wars. One of the most significant battles during this conflict was the Battle of Worms in 1345. The battle took place near the village of Worms, close to the IJsselmeer, and was part of a larger campaign by Count William IV of Holland to conquer Friesland. The Count, leading a well-equipped army of knights and soldiers, expected an easy victory over the lightly armed Frisian forces. However, the Frisians, using their knowledge of the local terrain and their guerrilla tactics, managed to trap the Hollanders in the marshy land near Stavern. The result was a crushing defeat for the forces of Holland. Count William IV himself was killed in the battle, and his army was routed. The victory at Worms became a symbol of Frisian resistance, and is still commemorated in Friesland today as a day of pride and remembrance. The battle reinforced the idea of Frisian freedom and served as a powerful reminder of the Frisians' determination to defend their autonomy. The struggle for Frisian independence was not limited to conflicts with the County of Holland. The bishops of Utrecht, who wielded both spiritual and temporal power in the region, also sought to extend their influence over Friesland. The bishops claimed suzerainty over Friesland based on ancient rights granted by the Holy Roman Emperor, and they frequently attempted to impose their authority through military campaigns. The Frisians, however, were equally determined to resist the bishops' claims. Throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, Friesland was the scene of numerous conflicts between the Frisians and the forces of Utrecht. These wars were often brutal and destructive, with villages being burned, fields destroyed, and many lives lost. Despite the odds, the Frisians managed to maintain their independence, relying on their decentralized political structure and their ability to mobilize local militias. The decentralized nature of Frisian society during this period was both a strength and a weakness. On the one hand, the lack of a strong central authority made it difficult for external powers to conquer and control Friesland. The local assemblies and the tradition of self-governance ensured that the Frisians remained fiercely independent and resistant to external rule. On the other hand, the absence of central leadership often led to internal conflicts and divisions within Friesland itself. One of the most significant internal conflicts was the feud between the Schieringers and the Vetkopers, two rival factions that emerged in the late 14th century. The Schieringers and Vetkopers were not so much political parties as they were alliances of noble families, clans, and communities that vied for power and influence in Friesland. The origins of the feud are complex and rooted in local disputes over land, resources, and political control. The rivalry between the Schieringers and Vetkopers led to decades of civil war within Friesland, as villages, towns, and even families took sides in the conflict. The feuding weakened Friesland and made it more vulnerable to external threats, as the warring factions often sought alliances with neighboring powers like the Counts of Holland, the Bishops of Utrecht, and even the Dukes of Burgundy, in order to gain an advantage over their rivals. The internal strife between the Schieringers and Vetkopers came to a head in the early 15th century, when the conflict reached a scale that threatened to tear Friesland apart. The civil wars were characterized by brutal violence, with raids, sieges, and battles becoming a common occurrence. The ongoing conflict drained Friesland's resources and undermined the cohesion of Frisian society. In an effort to restore order, some Frisian leaders sought to establish a more centralized form of governance that could bring an end to the feuding and defend Friesland against external enemies. However, these efforts were often met with resistance from those who valued the traditional decentralized structure of Frisian society and feared the concentration of power in the hands of a few. Despite the challenges posed by both internal and external conflicts, the idea of Frisian freedom endured throughout this tumultuous period. The Frisians' commitment to their independence and their unique way of life remained strong, even as they faced the pressures of feudalism, religious conflict, and the ambitions of powerful neighbors. The Frisian freedom eventually came to an end in the late 15th century, when Friesland was finally conquered by the Dukes of Burgundy. The Burgundians, under Duke Philip the Good and later his son Charles the Bold, sought to bring Friesland under their control as part of their efforts to consolidate their power in the Low Countries. Despite fierce resistance from the Frisians, the Burgundians succeeded in imposing their rule over Friesland, marking the end of an era of independence. The conquest of Friesland by the Burgundians marked a significant turning point in Frisian history. While the Frisians were no longer politically independent, their sense of identity and their cultural traditions remained strong. The legacy of the Frisian freedom continued to influence Frisian society, and the memory of their struggles for independence became an enduring part of Frisian heritage. In conclusion, the period of Frisian freedom was a defining era in the history of the Frisians. It was a time when they fought to maintain their autonomy and resist the encroachments of powerful neighbors. The battles, alliances, and internal conflicts of this period shaped the course of Frisian history and left a lasting impact on their identity as a people. The idea of Frisian freedom, even after its political demise, continued to resonate in the hearts and minds of the Frisians, symbolizing their enduring commitment to independence and self-determination. The conquest of Friesland by the Dukes of Burgundy in the late 15th century marked the end of an era for the Frisians. The period of Frisian freedom, during which the Frisians had fiercely defended their autonomy and self-governance, was over. With the imposition of Burgundian rule, Friesland was drawn into the orbit of the powerful Burgundian state, which sought to centralize control over its vast territories in the Low Countries. This chapter explores the impact of Burgundian and later Hapsburg rule on Friesland, the Frisians' resistance to external authority, and the ways in which Frisian culture and language evolved during this period of foreign domination. The Burgundians, under Duke Philip the Good and his successor Charles the Bold, were determined to bring Friesland under their control as part of their broader efforts to consolidate power in the region. However, the Frisians were not easily subdued. Despite the military defeat that had ended the Frisian freedom, the Frisians retained a strong sense of identity and a deep-seated aversion to foreign rule. The Burgundians faced persistent resistance from Frisian communities, who were unwilling to submit to centralized authority and continued to assert their traditional rights and privileges. One of the most significant challenges for the Burgundians was the decentralized nature of Frisian society. Unlike other regions in the Low Countries, where feudal structures had taken root, Friesland had long been characterized by its lack of a strong central authority. The Frisians were governed by local assemblies, or things, where decisions were made collectively by free men. This tradition of self-governance was deeply ingrained in Frisian culture, and it posed a significant obstacle to the Burgundians' efforts to impose their rule. The Burgundians attempted to enforce their authority by appointing local governors and officials, often from outside Friesland, to oversee the administration of the region. These officials were tasked with collecting taxes, enforcing laws, and maintaining order on behalf of the Burgundian state. However, their authority was frequently challenged by the Frisians, who viewed them as foreign interlopers with no legitimate claim to power. Acts of defiance, including tax resistance, attacks on officials, and refusals to recognize Burgundian laws, were common. The imposition of Burgundian rule also led to significant changes in Frisian society. The traditional Frisian legal system, which had been based on customary law and the lex Frisianum, was gradually replaced by Burgundian legal codes and institutions. This process was met with considerable resistance from the Frisians, who were deeply attached to their own legal traditions. The transition to Burgundian law was slow and uneven, with many Frisians continuing to adhere to their own customs and practices despite the official imposition of foreign law. The decline of the traditional Frisian legal system was accompanied by broader social and economic changes. Under Burgundian rule, Friesland was increasingly integrated into the economic networks of the Low Countries, which were among the most prosperous and dynamic regions in Europe at the time. The Burgundians sought to exploit Friesland's agricultural resources, particularly its dairy production, which was highly valued in the growing urban markets of the Low Countries. The expansion of trade and commerce brought new opportunities to Friesland, but it also exposed the region to the influence of outside cultures and ideas. One of the most significant consequences of Burgundian rule was the gradual erosion of the Frisian language's status as the dominant language of administration and public life. The Burgundians and later the Hapsburgs, who succeeded them in the 16th century, promoted the use of Dutch and Latin in official matters, diminishing the role of Old Frisian as a written language. This shift was particularly evident in legal documents, religious texts, and official correspondence, where Dutch and Latin increasingly replaced Old Frisian. Despite this decline in official usage, Old Frisian continued to be spoken by the common people in Friesland. The language remained an important marker of Frisian identity, and it was used in everyday communication, oral traditions, and local customs. However, the pressures of Burgundian and Hapsburg rule, combined with the growing influence of Dutch, led to the gradual evolution of Old Frisian into Middle Frisian. This linguistic transition was marked by changes in grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation, reflecting the influence of Dutch as well as the natural evolution of the language over time. The Hapsburgs, who inherited the Burgundian territories in the Low Countries following the death of Charles the Bold in 1477, continued the policies of centralization and control that had begun under their predecessors. Under the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, Friesland was further integrated into the broader Habsburg dominions, which spanned much of Europe. Charles V sought to enforce his authority in Friesland through a combination of military force and administrative reform, but he faced persistent resistance from the Frisian population. One of the most significant episodes of Frisian resistance during the Habsburg period was the revolt led by Peer Gerlofsdonia and Wijger Jelkema in the early 16th century. Known as the Aramerswart Hoop, Black Band of Aram, this group of Frisian rebels fought against the Habsburg forces in an effort to restore Frisian independence. Peer Gerlofsdonia, also known as Grut Peer, Big Peer, became a legendary figure in Frisian history, celebrated for his bravery and strength. He was said to have wielded a massive sword and to have been capable of decapitating multiple enemies with a single blow. The revolt, which began in 1515, was fueled by widespread discontent with Habsburg rule, particularly the heavy taxes and harsh treatment imposed by the imperial authorities. The Aramerswart Hoop launched a series of raids and attacks against Habsburg forces, capturing towns and fortresses and challenging the authority of the Habsburg-appointed officials. Despite their initial successes, the revolt ultimately failed, and both Grut Peer and Jelkema were killed in battle. However, their resistance became a symbol of Frisian defiance and a testament to the enduring spirit of Frisian independence. The Habsburg period also saw significant changes in the religious landscape of Friesland. The Protestant Reformation, which swept across Europe in the 16th century, had a profound impact on Friesland. The Frisians, who had been largely Catholic under Burgundian and Hapsburg rule, began to embrace Protestantism, particularly Calvinism, which resonated with their traditions of independence and self-governance. The adoption of Protestantism was accompanied by the destruction of Catholic churches and monasteries, the removal of religious icons, and the establishment of a new religious order based on Protestant principles. The Reformation in Friesland was not without conflict. The region experienced religious tensions and violence as communities divided along confessional lines. The Hapsburgs, who remained staunchly Catholic, attempted to suppress the spread of Protestantism in their territories, leading to further unrest. The religious conflict in Friesland culminated in the 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648, a broader struggle for independence that pitted the Protestant Dutch provinces, including Friesland, against the Catholic Habsburg monarchy. Friesland played a crucial role in the Dutch revolt, as it was one of the provinces that joined the Union of Utrecht in 1579, a declaration of unity among the rebellious provinces against Habsburg rule. The Union of Utrecht laid the foundation for the eventual independence of the Dutch Republic, of which Friesland became a part. The end of the 80 Years' War with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 marked the official recognition of the Dutch Republic's independence, including that of Friesland. Throughout this tumultuous period, the Frisians managed to maintain their distinct identity, even as they were subjected to foreign rule and the pressures of centralization. The evolution of Old Frisian into Middle Frisian, the persistence of local customs and laws, and the enduring tradition of resistance to external authority all contributed to the survival of Frisian culture. Despite the challenges posed by Burgundian and Hapsburg rule, the Frisians continued to assert their identity and adapt to the changing political and religious landscape. In conclusion, the period of Burgundian and Hapsburg rule was a time of significant change and challenge for Friesland. The Frisians faced the erosion of their traditional legal and linguistic practices, the imposition of foreign authority, and the pressures of religious conflict. However, they also demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, preserving their cultural identity and continuing to resist external domination. The legacy of this period would have a lasting impact on Friesland, shaping its development in the centuries to come. The conclusion of the 80 Years' War and the establishment of the Dutch Republic in 1648 marked a new chapter in the history of Friesland. No longer under the rule of foreign powers like the Burgundians and Hapsburgs, Friesland became an integral part of the independent Dutch Republic. However, this new political arrangement brought its own challenges and opportunities as the Frisians sought to maintain their distinct cultural identity within a larger, more centralized state. This chapter explores the transition from Middle Frisian to Modern Frisian, the role of Friesland in the Dutch Republic, and the ongoing efforts to preserve Frisian language and culture during this period. With the formation of the Dutch Republic, Friesland became one of the 7 provinces that made up the new state. The Union of Utrecht, which had laid the foundation for the Republic, guaranteed the autonomy of each province, allowing Friesland to retain a degree of self-governance. Friesland was governed by its own provincial states, which consisted of representatives from the towns and rural districts. These representatives were responsible for making decisions on matters such as taxation, trade, and law, and they played a key role in maintaining Frisian autonomy within the larger framework of the Dutch Republic. One of the most significant aspects of Frisian autonomy was the continued use of the Frisian language in local administration, law, and education. While Dutch had become the dominant language in the central government and in many other provinces, Frisian remained an important part of daily life in Friesland. However, the transition from Middle Frisian to Modern Frisian was already underway by the 17th century, reflecting broader changes in Frisian society and its interactions with the Dutch-speaking world. The shift from Middle Frisian to Modern Frisian was marked by several linguistic changes, including the simplification of grammar, the adoption of new vocabulary, and the influence of Dutch on pronunciation and spelling. Middle Frisian, which had been the written standard since the late medieval period, gradually gave way to a more modern form of the language that was closer to the spoken Frisian of the time. This transition was not sudden but occurred gradually over the course of several centuries, as Frisian speakers adapted their language to the changing social and cultural environment. One of the key factors driving the evolution of Modern Frisian was the influence of Dutch. As Friesland became more integrated into the Dutch Republic, the use of Dutch in official documents, education, and trade increased. Many Frisian speakers became bilingual, using Frisian in their personal and local affairs while adopting Dutch for broader communication within the Republic. This bilingualism contributed to the development of modern Frisian, as the language absorbed elements of Dutch while retaining its distinct Frisian character. Despite the growing influence of Dutch, efforts to preserve and promote the Frisian language continued throughout the early modern period. Frisian scholars, poets, and writers began to take a renewed interest in their language and cultural heritage, producing works that celebrated Frisian history and identity. This period saw the publication of some of the earliest modern Frisian texts, including legal documents, religious writings, and poetry. One of the most notable figures in the preservation of the Frisian language during this period was Gijsbert Japicx, 1603 to 1666, a poet and writer who is often credited with laying the foundations of modern Frisian literature. Japicx's works, which included poems, songs, and prose, were written in a form of Frisian that was accessible to the common people, helping to standardize the language and ensure its survival in the face of increasing Dutch influence. His contributions to Frisian literature earned him a lasting place in Frisian cultural history, and he is still celebrated today as a key figure in the development of modern Frisian. The role of Friesland within the Dutch Republic was not limited to language and culture. It also had important political and economic dimensions. As one of the 7 provinces, Friesland participated in the governance of the Republic through its representatives in the States General, the central legislative body. Friesland's representatives played a significant role in shaping the policies of the Republic, particularly in matters related to trade, finance, and defense. Economically, Friesland benefited from its integration into the Dutch Republic, which was one of the most prosperous and powerful states in Europe during the 17th century. The Dutch Republic's dominance in global trade and commerce provided new opportunities for Frisian merchants and traders, who participated in the booming markets for goods such as dairy products, textiles, and maritime trade. Friesland's agricultural sector, particularly its dairy industry, became increasingly important as the province supplied butter, cheese, and other products to the growing cities of the Republic. However, Friesland's relationship with the central government in The Hague was not always smooth. The province's strong tradition of autonomy and local governance sometimes brought it into conflict with the centralizing tendencies of the Dutch Republic. Friesland was known for its resistance to centralized control, particularly in matters of taxation and military conscription. The Frisians were often wary of the ambitions of the House of Orange, the ruling dynasty of the Dutch Republic, and they sought to protect their local privileges and rights from encroachment by the central authorities. This tension was evident during the first stadtholderless period, 1650 to 1672, a time when the Dutch Republic was without a stadtholder, the chief executive officer of the Republic, often held by a member of the House of Orange. During this period, Friesland, along with other provinces, asserted its independence from the House of Orange and sought to strengthen its own institutions of self-governance. The absence of a stadtholder allowed Friesland to play a more prominent role in the governance of the Republic, particularly in matters related to trade and foreign policy. The second stadtholderless period, 1702 to 1747, also saw Friesland maintaining its autonomous stance, though the province faced challenges from within and without. The rise of Prussia as a European power and the ongoing conflicts with France put pressure on the Dutch Republic, leading to debates over the role of the stadtholder and the balance of power between the provinces and the central government. Friesland, with its strong tradition of independence, was a key player in these debates, often advocating for the preservation of provincial rights and the limitation of central authority. Despite these challenges, Friesland continued to thrive as a distinct province within the Dutch Republic. The Frisians remained proud of their language, culture, and traditions, and they worked to preserve their unique identity in a rapidly changing world. The development of modern Frisian, the contributions of figures like Gijsbert Japicx, and the province's role in the governance and economy of the Republic all contributed to the continued vitality of Friesland during this period. As the 18th century progressed, Friesland, like the rest of the Dutch Republic, began to face new challenges. The Republic's economic and political power began to decline, leading to increased tensions both within and between the provinces. The rise of new ideologies, including Enlightenment thought and early nationalist movements, began to challenge traditional structures of authority and governance, setting the stage for further changes in Friesland and the wider Dutch Republic. In conclusion, the period following the establishment of the Dutch Republic was one of both continuity and change for Friesland. The transition from Middle Frisian to modern Frisian, the province's role within the Dutch Republic, and the ongoing efforts to preserve Frisian identity and culture all played a significant role in shaping the course of Frisian history during this era. Despite the challenges of integration into a larger state and the pressures of cultural assimilation, the Frisians managed to maintain their distinct identity and contribute to the broader developments of the Dutch Republic. The 18th century brought significant intellectual, political, and social changes across Europe, with the Enlightenment challenging traditional authorities and promoting new ideas about reason, individual rights, and governance. These changes did not bypass Friesland, where the Frisians found themselves grappling with the implications of Enlightenment thought, the decline of the Dutch Republic, and the eventual French occupation. This chapter explores how the Frisians responded to these challenges, preserving their identity and adapting to the new realities of a rapidly changing world. The Enlightenment, often referred to as the Age of Reason, was a period of intellectual flourishing that emphasized the importance of science, rational thought, and the questioning of traditional authority. In the Dutch Republic, Enlightenment ideas found fertile ground, particularly among the urban elite, who began to challenge the dominance of the church, the aristocracy, and the old feudal structures. These ideas also spread to Friesland, where they sparked debates about the nature of governance, education, and individual rights. In Friesland, the Enlightenment was embraced by a growing class of intellectuals, merchants, and professionals who saw in it an opportunity to reform society and improve the lives of ordinary people. These thinkers advocated for educational reforms, the expansion of civil rights, and the promotion of scientific inquiry. Frisian scholars and writers began to engage with Enlightenment ideas, contributing to the broader intellectual movements that were transforming European society. One of the key figures in the Frisian Enlightenment was Johan van Halen, a prominent Frisian lawyer, politician, and writer who was deeply influenced by Enlightenment thought. Van Halen was an advocate for legal reform and the promotion of education in Friesland. He believed that the principles of reason and justice should guide the governance of Friesland and the Dutch Republic as a whole. His writings and speeches were instrumental in spreading Enlightenment ideals in Friesland, particularly among the educated classes. The Enlightenment also had a significant impact on Frisian education. In line with the broader trends of the time, there was a push to modernize the educational system, making it more accessible and aligned with the principles of rational thought and scientific inquiry. Schools in Friesland began to adopt new curricula that emphasized subjects like mathematics, natural sciences, and modern languages, in addition to the traditional study of Latin and theology. This educational reform was seen as essential for preparing the next generation of Frisians to engage with the challenges of the modern world. However, the spread of Enlightenment ideas was not without controversy. In Friesland, as in other parts of Europe, there was resistance to these new ideas from more conservative elements of society, particularly the church and the rural aristocracy. These groups viewed the Enlightenment as a threat to the established social order and the authority of traditional institutions. The resulting tensions between progressives and conservatives played out in various arenas, from local governance to religious practice, and sometimes led to bitter disputes. The challenges facing Friesland during this period were further compounded by the broader political instability in the Dutch Republic. By the late 18th century, the Republic was in decline, weakened by internal divisions, economic stagnation, and external threats from rival powers like Britain and France. The political structure of the Republic, with its decentralized governance and the ongoing power struggles between the provinces and the central government, proved increasingly inadequate in addressing the complex challenges of the time. The decline of the Dutch Republic culminated in the Patriot Revolt of the 1780s, a popular movement that sought to reform the Republic's government and reduce the power of the stadtholder, who was seen by many as an autocratic ruler. The Patriots, inspired by Enlightenment ideals and the example of the American Revolution, demanded greater political participation, freedom of the press, and the establishment of a more democratic system. Friesland, with its strong tradition of independence and local governance, was a center of patriot activity, with many Frisians supporting the call for reform. However, the Patriot Revolt ultimately failed, as the stadtholder William V called upon his Prussian allies to suppress the uprising. The defeat of the Patriots led to a period of repression, with many of the movement's leaders fleeing into exile. Despite this setback, the ideas of the Patriot movement continued to resonate in Friesland, laying the groundwork for future struggles for political reform. The situation in Friesland and the Dutch Republic took a dramatic turn in the 1790s with the outbreak of the French Revolutionary Wars. The French Revolution, with its radical ideas about liberty, equality, and fraternity, had a profound impact on Europe, and the Dutch Republic was no exception. In 1795, the French revolutionary armies invaded the Republic, overthrowing the old regime and establishing the Batavian Republic as a sister republic to revolutionary France. The French occupation of the Netherlands, including Friesland, brought significant changes. The Batavian Republic was modeled on the French Republic with a centralized government, a new legal code, and a commitment to the principles of the revolution. The old provincial structures were dismantled, and Friesland, like the other provinces, was subjected to the authority of the new central government in The Hague. For many Frisians, the French occupation was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and the abolition of feudal privileges resonated with the traditions of Frisian freedom and self-governance. The French reforms, including the introduction of civil rights, the secularization of education, and the promotion of the Dutch language, were seen by some as progressive steps that aligned with Enlightenment ideals. On the other hand, the loss of provincial autonomy and the imposition of French rule were deeply resented by many Frisians. The centralization of power in The Hague and the replacement of Frisian customs and laws with French-inspired codes were viewed as a direct assault on Frisian identity and traditions. The heavy taxation and conscription imposed by the French authorities further fueled discontent, leading to widespread resistance and unrest in Friesland. One of the most significant acts of resistance was the refusal of many Frisians to accept the conscription of their sons into the French army. This resistance often took the form of evasion, with young men fleeing into the countryside or hiding to avoid being drafted. The resentment towards conscription was a reflection of the broader opposition to French rule and the desire to preserve Frisian autonomy. Despite the challenges posed by the French occupation, the Frisians continued to maintain their cultural and linguistic identity. The Frisian language, which had evolved into modern Frisian, remained a vital part of everyday life, particularly in rural areas. Frisian culture, including its traditions of music, folklore, and communal life, persisted even as the pressures of assimilation and centralization intensified. The French occupation of the Netherlands ended in 1813, following the defeat of Napoleon and the collapse of the French Empire. The fall of Napoleon led to the restoration of the House of Orange and the establishment of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included the northern and southern provinces of the former Dutch Republic. Friesland, like the other provinces, was reintegrated into the new kingdom, but the legacy of the French occupation continued to shape Frisian society. In conclusion, the period of the Enlightenment and French occupation was one of significant upheaval and change for Friesland. The spread of Enlightenment ideas, the decline of the Dutch Republic, and the imposition of French rule all posed challenges to Frisian identity and autonomy. However, the Frisians responded to these challenges with resilience, maintaining their cultural and linguistic heritage while adapting to the new realities of a changing world. The experiences of this period would have a lasting impact on Friesland, influencing its development in the 19th century and beyond. The 19th century was a time of profound change for Friesland and the broader Netherlands. Following the end of French rule and the establishment of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands in 1815, Friesland faced new political, economic, and social challenges. The rise of industrialization, the push for national integration, and the ongoing struggle to preserve Frisian identity all shaped the course of Frisian history during this period. This chapter delves into how Friesland navigated these changes and the impact they had on Frisian society and culture. The United Kingdom of the Netherlands, created by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, brought together the northern and southern provinces of the former Dutch Republic along with the Austrian Netherlands, modern-day Belgium. The new kingdom was intended to be a strong, unified state that could serve as a buffer against French expansionism. However, this union was fraught with tensions, particularly between the largely Protestant North and the Catholic South. For Friesland, the creation of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands meant further integration into a larger national framework. The province retained a degree of autonomy, but it was now part of a centralized monarchy under King William I, who sought to modernize the state and promote national unity. This period saw significant efforts to standardize administration, education, and infrastructure across the kingdom, often at the expense of regional identities. One of the key challenges for Friesland during this time was the push for linguistic and cultural assimilation. Dutch became the official language of government, education, and public life, and there was increasing pressure on the Frisian people to adopt Dutch as their primary language. This was particularly evident in the education system, where Dutch was used as the language of instruction and Frisian was marginalized. Despite these pressures, the Frisian language and culture persisted, particularly in rural areas where Frisian remained the primary language spoken by the majority of the population. The 19th century also saw a growing movement to preserve and promote Frisian language and culture in the face of assimilation. This movement was part of a broader trend of Romantic nationalism that swept across Europe during the 19th century, as people sought to rediscover and celebrate their unique cultural heritages. One of the key figures in this Frisian cultural revival was Eeltje Hittes Halbertsma, 1797 to 1858, a poet, writer, and linguist who played a central role in the preservation and promotion of the Frisian language. Halbertsma, along with his brother Joost Hittes Halbertsma, authored the Rijmen en Teltjes, Rhymes and Tales, a collection of poems and stories written in Frisian that became a cornerstone of Frisian literature. The Halbertsma brothers' work helped to legitimize Frisian as a literary language and inspired a new generation of Frisian writers and intellectuals. The 19th century also saw the beginning of efforts to codify and standardize the Frisian language. Linguists and scholars worked to develop a standardized orthography and grammar for Frisian, drawing on both the spoken language and historical texts. These efforts were crucial in ensuring the survival of Frisian as a written language and laid the groundwork for the continued development of modern Frisian in the 20th century. In addition to cultural challenges, Friesland also faced significant economic changes during the 19th century, driven by the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century and spread across Europe in the 19th century, brought about major transformations in industry, agriculture, and transportation. For Friesland, a predominantly rural and agricultural province, these changes had a profound impact on the economy and society. The introduction of new agricultural techniques and machinery led to increased productivity in Friesland's farms, particularly in dairy production, which had long been a staple of the Frisian economy. The expansion of the railways and the improvement of roads and canals facilitated the transport of agricultural products to markets across the Netherlands and beyond. These developments helped to integrate Friesland more fully into the national and global economy. However, the Industrial Revolution also brought challenges. The mechanization of agriculture reduced the demand for labor, leading to unemployment and economic hardship for many rural workers. The decline of traditional crafts and industries, such as peat digging and textile production, further exacerbated these difficulties. Many Frisians were forced to leave their homes in search of work, leading to a wave of emigration to the cities or abroad, particularly to the United States. The social and economic changes brought about by industrialization also had a significant impact on Frisian society. The rise of a new middle class, composed of merchants, industrialists, and professionals, began to reshape the social structure of Friesland. This new class was often more oriented towards Dutch culture and language, furthering the trend towards assimilation and modernization. At the same time, there was a growing movement among the Frisian working class and rural population to resist these changes and preserve their traditional way of life. This resistance took various forms, from the continuation of Frisian customs and traditions to the formation of social and political organizations that sought to protect the interests of the Frisian people. The 19th century saw the rise of Frisian cultural societies, agricultural cooperatives, and political movements that aimed to promote Frisian language, culture, and autonomy. One of the most significant developments in Frisian political life during this period was the emergence of the Frisian movement, a nationalist and cultural movement that sought to defend and promote Frisian identity within the Dutch state. The Frisian movement was influenced by similar movements in other parts of Europe, particularly the Celtic revival in Ireland and the Breton nationalist movement in France. It was characterized by a strong emphasis on the preservation of the Frisian language, the promotion of Frisian history and culture, and the defense of Frisian autonomy. The Frisian movement was also linked to broader social and political developments in the Netherlands, including the rise of liberalism and the push for greater democratization. The mid-19th century saw significant political reforms in the Netherlands, including the extension of the franchise and the reduction of the power of the monarchy. These changes opened up new opportunities for political participation in Friesland, where the Frisian movement began to make its voice heard in both local and national politics. By the late 19th century, Friesland had established itself as a distinct and resilient province within the Netherlands. The efforts to preserve Frisian language and culture, the adaptation to economic changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution, and the political activism of the Frisian movement all contributed to the continued vitality of Frisian identity. However, the challenges of integration, industrialization, and modernization remained, setting the stage for further struggles in the 20th century. In conclusion, the 19th century was a period of significant transformation for Friesland, marked by both challenges and opportunities. The province's integration into the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, the impact of the Industrial Revolution, and the ongoing efforts to preserve Frisian identity and culture all played a crucial role in shaping the course of Frisian history during this period. Despite the pressures of assimilation and modernization, the Frisians continued to assert their distinct identity and adapt to the changing world around them. The 20th century was a period of immense upheaval and transformation for Friesland, as it was for much of the world. The century was marked by two devastating world wars, the struggles of the post-war period, and significant social and political changes. Despite these challenges, Friesland experienced a cultural revival in the later part of the century, with renewed efforts to preserve and promote the Frisian language and identity. This chapter explores how the Frisians navigated the events of the 20th century and continued to maintain their unique cultural heritage. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, was a global conflict that profoundly affected Europe, but the Netherlands, including Friesland, remained neutral throughout the war. Despite this neutrality, the war had a significant impact on Friesland. The proximity of the front lines in neighboring Belgium, combined with the economic blockade imposed by the Allied powers, led to shortages of food and other essential goods in the Netherlands. Friesland, with its strong agricultural base, was somewhat insulated from the worst effects of these shortages, but the war nonetheless disrupted trade and caused economic hardship for many. During the war, Friesland became a refuge for thousands of Belgian refugees fleeing the conflict. The Frisians, like other Dutch citizens, opened their homes and communities to these refugees, providing them with shelter and support. The presence of these refugees brought the realities of the war closer to home for many Frisians, even as the province itself remained relatively untouched by the conflict. The end of the First World War brought relief but also new challenges for Friesland. The post-war period was marked by economic difficulties, political instability, and social change. The Dutch economy struggled to recover from the disruptions of the war, leading to high unemployment and widespread poverty. In Friesland, the agricultural sector faced declining prices and competition from abroad, putting further strain on rural communities. The interwar period also saw the rise of new political movements, including socialism and fascism, which challenged the traditional political order in the Netherlands. In Friesland, these movements found support among different segments of the population, reflecting the broader social and economic tensions of the time. The Frisian movement, which had emerged in the 19th century, continued to advocate for the preservation of Frisian culture and language, but it also became increasingly involved in the broader political debates of the era. The outbreak of the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, brought even greater challenges to Friesland. The Netherlands was invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany in May 1940, and Friesland, like the rest of the country, came under the control of the German occupiers. The occupation was a dark period in Friesland's history, marked by repression, resistance, and suffering. The Nazi occupation had a profound impact on Frisian society. The occupiers sought to impose their ideology on the Dutch people, including the Frisians, through propaganda, censorship, and repression. The Frisian language, which had always been a symbol of resistance and identity, was targeted by the occupiers, who sought to suppress its use in public life. Schools were forced to teach in Dutch and German, and Frisian cultural organizations were disbanded or forced underground. Despite these efforts, the Frisians resisted the occupation in various ways. The resistance movement in Friesland was active and well-organized, engaging in acts of sabotage, espionage, and the sheltering of Jews and other persecuted groups. Many Frisians joined the underground resistance, risking their lives to fight against the occupiers and protect their communities. The resistance was also supported by the broader population, who provided food, shelter, and other assistance to those involved in the struggle. One of the most significant acts of resistance in Friesland was the raid on the Leeuwarden prison in December 1944, known as the Aanslag op het Huis van Bewaring, attack on the House of Detention. This daring operation, carried out by the Frisian resistance, resulted in the successful liberation of 51 prisoners, many of whom were members of the resistance. The raid was a major blow to the German occupiers and a symbol of Frisian defiance in the face of oppression. The end of the Second World War in 1945 brought liberation to Friesland, but the province, like the rest of the Netherlands, faced the daunting task of rebuilding. The war had left deep scars on Frisian society, with many lives lost, communities disrupted, and infrastructure damaged. The immediate post-war period was marked by efforts to rebuild the economy, restore social order, and address the needs of those who had suffered during the occupation. The post-war period also saw a renewed emphasis on the preservation and promotion of Frisian culture and language. The experience of the occupation, during which the Frisian language and identity had been threatened, reinforced the importance of cultural preservation for many Frisians. In the years following the war, there was a resurgence of interest in Frisian history, literature, and traditions, leading to the establishment of cultural organizations, festivals, and educational initiatives dedicated to promoting Frisian heritage. One of the key developments in the post-war cultural revival was the official recognition of Frisian as a language in its own right. In 1956, the Dutch government passed the Frisian Language Act, Friesche which granted Frisian official status alongside Dutch in Friesland. This recognition was a major victory for the Frisian movement and paved the way for the further promotion of the language in education, media, and public life. The post-war period also saw the establishment of the Frisian Academy, Frisk Academy, an institution dedicated to the study and promotion of the Frisian language, culture, and history. Founded in 1938 but gaining prominence after the war, the Frisian Academy played a central role in the standardization of modern Frisian, the production of educational materials in Frisian, and the promotion of Frisian research and scholarship. The second half of the 20th century also brought significant social and economic changes to Friesland, driven by modernization and globalization. The agricultural sector, which had long been the backbone of the Frisian economy, underwent further mechanization and consolidation, leading to the decline of small family farms and the rise of large-scale agribusiness. This shift had profound effects on rural communities, with many young people leaving the countryside to seek opportunities in the cities or abroad. At the same time, Friesland became increasingly integrated into the broader Dutch and European economies. The expansion of infrastructure, including roads, railways, and telecommunications, facilitated greater mobility and communication, bringing Friesland closer to the rest of the Netherlands and beyond. These changes brought new opportunities, but also posed challenges to the preservation of Frisian identity and traditions in a rapidly changing world. The late 20th century also saw the rise of new political movements and debates in Friesland, particularly around issues of regional autonomy, environmental protection, and cultural preservation. The Frisian movement, which had long advocated for the recognition of Frisian language and culture, began to focus more on issues of self-determination and regional governance. The movement's demands included greater control over local affairs, the protection of the Frisian landscape and environment, and the promotion of Frisian education and media. In conclusion, the 20th century was a time of immense change and challenge for Friesland. The impact of the world wars, the struggles of the post-war period, and the forces of modernization and globalization all shaped the course of Frisian history during this period. Despite these challenges, the Frisians demonstrated remarkable resilience, maintaining their cultural and linguistic identity and adapting to the changing world around them. The cultural revival of the post-war period, the official recognition of the Frisian language, and the ongoing efforts to promote Frisian heritage all contributed to the continued vitality of Friesland in the modern era. The 21st century has brought both challenges and opportunities for Friesland as it seeks to maintain its distinct cultural identity while embracing the realities of a rapidly globalizing world. With the rise of the European Union, technological advancements, and shifting social dynamics, Friesland has had to navigate its place within the Netherlands and Europe as a whole. This chapter explores how the Frisians are adapting to these changes, while continuing to uphold their unique traditions, language, and cultural heritage. One of the most significant developments in the 21st century has been the ongoing integration of Friesland into the European Union, EU. The Netherlands, as a member of the EU, is deeply involved in European politics, economics, and cultural exchange, and Friesland, as a province within the Netherlands, is affected by these broader trends. European integration has brought many benefits to Friesland, including access to funding for infrastructure projects, opportunities for cross-border cooperation, and participation in cultural and educational exchanges. However, European integration has also posed challenges to Frisian identity. The increasing dominance of English as the lingua franca of Europe, along with the pressures of globalization, has led to concerns about the marginalization of smaller regional languages like Frisian. In response, there has been a renewed emphasis on promoting and preserving the Frisian language within the context of a multilingual Europe. Friesland has been active in the Network to Promote Linguistic Diversity, NPLD, an EU initiative aimed at supporting regional and minority languages across Europe. Efforts to promote the Frisian language have included the introduction of Frisian language education at all levels, from primary schools to universities. The Frisian Language Act of 2014, which reinforced the official status of Frisian and guaranteed its use in education, government, and the legal system, was a significant milestone in these efforts. Additionally, cultural initiatives such as Frisian language media, literature, and the arts have played a crucial role in keeping the language vibrant and relevant in the 21st century. One of the most notable cultural achievements for Friesland in recent years was the designation of Leeuwarden, the provincial capital, as the European Capital of Culture in 2018. This prestigious title brought international attention to Friesland and provided a platform for showcasing Frisian culture, history, and creativity. The year-long program of events included performances, exhibitions, and community projects that celebrated Friesland's unique heritage while also exploring contemporary issues such as sustainability, innovation, and social inclusion. The success of Leeuwarden's tenure as the European Capital of Culture demonstrated the potential for Friesland to balance tradition with innovation. The events highlighted the province's rich cultural history, from its medieval roots to its maritime heritage, while also embracing modern themes such as environmental stewardship and technological innovation. This approach reflects the broader strategy of Friesland in the 21st century, preserving its distinct identity while engaging with global challenges and opportunities. Another area where tradition meets innovation in Friesland is in its approach to environmental sustainability. The province's low-lying geography and historical experience with water management have made it acutely aware of the challenges posed by climate change, rising sea levels, and environmental degradation. Friesland has been at the forefront of efforts to develop sustainable practices in agriculture, energy, and water management, drawing on both traditional knowledge and cutting-edge technology. Frisian farmers, for example, have been pioneers in adopting sustainable agricultural practices, such as organic farming, precision agriculture, and the protection of biodiversity. The province has also invested in renewable energy sources, including wind, solar, and biogas, as part of its commitment to reducing carbon emissions and transitioning to a green economy. These efforts have not only helped to protect Friesland's natural environment but have also positioned the province as a leader in sustainability within the Netherlands and beyond. The concept of gemeenschap, community, remains a central aspect of Frisian identity and has been a guiding principle in many of these initiatives. The strong sense of community in Friesland is reflected in the way people come together to address shared challenges. Whether it's managing water resources, preserving cultural heritage, or promoting social cohesion. This sense of collective responsibility and solidarity is deeply rooted in Frisian history and continues to shape the province's approach to modern issues. However, Friesland also faces ongoing challenges in the 21st century, particularly in terms of economic development and demographic change. Like many rural regions in Europe, Friesland has experienced population decline and aging, as younger people move to urban areas in search of education and employment opportunities. This trend has raised concerns about the long-term sustainability of rural communities and the preservation of Frisian culture and language. In response, there have been efforts to revitalize rural areas and create new opportunities for young people in Friesland. These initiatives include the promotion of entrepreneurship, the development of new industries such as tourism and technology, and the expansion of educational and cultural opportunities in the region. The goal is to create a vibrant, dynamic Friesland that can attract and retain young talent while also preserving its unique cultural heritage. One of the key strategies for achieving this goal has been the emphasis on digital innovation. Friesland has embraced the possibilities of the digital age, using technology to enhance education, promote local businesses, and connect the Frisian community both within the province and with the wider world. The use of digital platforms to teach and promote the Frisian language, for example, has opened up new avenues for language learning and cultural exchange, making Frisian more accessible to a global audience. In addition to these local initiatives, Friesland continues to play an active role in broader European and international networks that promote regional identity, cultural diversity, and sustainable development. By engaging with these networks, Friesland has been able to share its experiences and learn from other regions facing similar challenges, strengthening its position as a dynamic and resilient province within the Netherlands and Europe. In conclusion, the 21st century has brought both challenges and opportunities for Friesland as it seeks to balance tradition with innovation in a rapidly changing world. The province has made significant strides in promoting and preserving the Frisian language and culture, while also embracing modern technology, sustainability, and economic development. As Friesland moves forward, the strong sense of community and identity that has defined its history will continue to guide its approach to the future, ensuring that the province remains a vibrant and distinctive part of the Netherlands and Europe.